Hello and welcome to our weekly Shiur on the Parshas of Shavua with the commentary of the Alshich. And as you can see, we're in a classroom. This is the seminary which I teach at, one of the seminaries I teach at, my main seminary I teach at, which is in Bentonhurst, and the seminary is called Elyon. Enjoy it very, very much. And you're in one of the classrooms. So if you're a lady and you were in seminary in the past, I hope you'll look upon this as recapturing your youth and your early days. If you've never been to seminary, welcome to your first seminary experience. If you're a man and you want to know what it's like being in seminary, it's a bit like this. We even have a board, an old-fashioned board with chalk, which is very exciting because over there is one of these smart boards, which are also good fun, but there's a certain affection for the old stuff here. Parshas Tazria is the parsha we're going to be looking at this week. And in Parshas Tazria, it starts off, well, we'll read that in just a second, but let me remind you that if you'd like to have the Shiur dedicated to anybody that you have in mind who might want to celebrate a simcha or commemorate somebody who's passed away or for any good Jewish reason, please just send me an email to YY, this is really exciting writing this on the board, at rabbiyyy.com. So I hope you can see that, YY at rabbiyyy.com, and I'll be very happy to dedicate the Shiur for the person that you have in mind. So as my wife is having a knee replacement operation next week, I hope you'll forgive me if I steal the dedication for her to have a refuah shalema on Tuesday, which is having the surgery, for Ita Rivka Bas Sima Esther. Maybe you'll have her in your tefillahs. We would be both very, very grateful indeed. And so we come to Parshas Tazria. It's funny, didn't quite work out. I was supposed to be speaking at a Sheva Brochas last night. And of course, the thing about Tazria, it talks about a woman who gives birth at the beginning, and there's a period of tuma. Tuma is a very hard word to translate, but let's use the incorrect word of impurity for a period of 40 days altogether if she gives birth to a boy, and twice that amount, 80 days, if she gives birth to a girl. I remember in Gateshead, once I was speaking at a Sheva Brochas, I was the third speaker. The first speaker stood up and said, and of course it's Parshas Tazria, brand new Chosn and Kala, talking about all sorts of impurities through blood and stuff like that, perhaps not appropriate to talk about, and consequently he said, I'll talk about something different. With that introduction, the second one did the same. When I stood up, I said, I don't know what the previous two speakers have mentioned that it's not appropriate. It's very hard to find something appropriate to say for Parshas Tazria. I think it's extremely easy. However, as they didn't want to talk about it, I'll not talk about it either. And that was that. You can hear noise incidentally outside from young ladies making a noise in the corridor. Let's do some real stuff there. I can ask them if they would be. Well, that didn't work. Anyway, so basically, so back to Parshas Tazria. Parshas Tazria is a difficult parsha to deal with. Let's remind ourselves what it says, and we're going to look at it through the eyes of the Alshich. He's going to take us into some extraordinarily interesting territory, and let's start. So, if you have your Chumash in front of you, that would be very useful. If not, pause, rush away and get one, and then we can continue with the parsha. The parsha, this is in Vayikra, and it's Perik Yud Beis, and it's Pasuk Aleph. V'yidaber Hashem al Moshe lemor, and Hashem speaks to Moshe, and he says, Daber Bnei Israel, speak to the Jewish people. Lemor to say, Isha ki Tazria, a woman who is Tazria. Let's just translate that, although it's an extremely difficult word to translate, and I'm not going to struggle with that one, or it will take us too far down a sidetrack from where the main road I'd like to go. But let's say a woman who conceives. A woman who conceives v'yoda zochar, and she gives birth to a male child, v'toma shivas yomim, so she will be in the state of tuma for 7 days. Now tuma normally, as I said, we were struggling with the translation of that. Tuma normally means that it's impure. Normally it's translated as impurity. But all tumas, all the Torah's category of tuma, this strange word, all refers to connection with death. The ultimate tuma is a dead body, a human body which is dead. But in a sense, the blood which is released in the normally monthly cycle of a woman's body, which is a failed life, an egg which was not fertilized to turn into human life, in a sense is a brush with death, or a connection. It's connected to a death, the death of a cell that didn't make it to be a fully grown human. That's why there's tumah of this monthly cycle of the woman's body that we all know about, which the mikveh is the solution to. And indeed, as we'll see in a second, there is a connection. The Torah connects the giving birth of a child to that category of tumah, which sounds a little bit strange. After all, it's not a death; it's a life. But let me just—I'm getting ahead of myself here. I should have, from an educational point of view, just read the psukim before I started complicating things. I will ask for your forgiveness and start from the beginning. V'yidaber Hashem al Moshe lemar, and Hashem speaks to Moshe. Daber ben Israel speaks to the Jewish people lemar. Isha ki Tazria, a woman who is Mazria, who conceives the Yod of Zocher, and she gives birth to a boy. Then Toma Shibas Yamin, she will be in a state of Tumah for 7 days. Kamini Dasa, just like if she was a Nida, that's the normal monthly cycle. Devosa Titma, so that's the period that she would be stuck in because of the release of blood from the womb. Ubiyam Hashmin, on the 8th day, Yimel Batar Lasa, and on the 8th day, then you should circumcise the boy. And of course, one of the Alshich questions is going to be, why does it tell us about bris milah here? What's that got to do with anything? It's got to do with childbirth. We've been told twice already in the Torah beforehand that the mitzvah of bris milah occurs in the 8th day. Why does it have to repeat it in this context? But let me read on. So after she is impure for 7 days, then it says, Shloshim yom, Shloshos yomim, and for 30 days, 33 days altogether, Tesha B'toma, I think I missed a page yet. Oh, sorry, B'divri Tahara. She'll go through a period, a time of purification from that state of tumah, but called Kodesh Lasiga. And during that state, before 40 days have been completed from the birth of the male child, then she can't touch anything that is Kodesh. That means it's got a connection to the Beis HaMikdash. The Beis HaMikdash is there to bring life. Tumah, of course, as I said before, is a resonance of death. V'al HaMikdash lo savod, she can't come to the Beis HaMikdash ad malasi mitahara, until 40 days have been completed altogether. The Im Mekeva say that, but if she gives birth to a female child, but Toma Shuvayim, she will be spend 14 days in a state of nidas. The Shishim Yom, the Shishim V'sheshes Yomim, and 66 days, completely double the formula from before. So 14 days in a state of Tumah, and it's going to be 66 days altogether to get her out of that state. And so in combination, you're going to have altogether 80 days, Yom V'teshiv al Demitahara, and Mulasi Mitahara, when she fulfills that time, Leben Labat from a boy or a girl, then Tavi Kevis Akshanosa, and then she brings the sacrifice to the Beis HaMikdash, and then everything is fine. Now, then straight after that, the Pasuk goes on and tells Aaron about the various sacrifices. It tells Aaron about the process of somebody who has got Tzoras. And Tzoras is translated, I've got the English thing here, the English translation of the Art Scroll, and they simply do not translate that. The old translation translated this as leprosy. But you'll know what leprosy is. It's a failure of the body to be able to regenerate itself after it's been damaged. Skin heals itself after it's been damaged. When you're infected with leprosy, that does not happen anymore, and therefore people with leprosy, damaged skin becomes dead skin and dead limbs. And of course we all know it's a terrible disease, which is curable today through antibiotics. But in the case of somebody with Surrash, then there is various types of Surrash. Now this is a very different illness, so we're not really going to translate it as leprosy, because we're not talking about a physical illness at all. And the main reason that Tzoras occurs is because of Lashon Hara. So just because you badmouth, you slander somebody, you gossip about somebody, how on earth could that trigger and provoke a physical response from your body? So in the case of a physical infection, then that could produce leprosy. In fact, contact with a leper often produces a transmission of the disease to somebody else. But here it's just, we're talking about a spiritual disease, or the manifestation of a symbol of a spiritual disease, which is going to have is going to appear on the skin of somebody, usually a white spot. And the Torah then goes in great length. The code shall look at the skin of his flesh. If there's a hair in the affliction, it's turned white, and the affliction's appearance is deeper than the skin of his flesh. A whole process of different colours of skin, which suggests that the person has got this strange, mysterious illness called Tzoras, not physical leprosy. Fine. Now, before we go into look at the Alshich, I want to return to this idea of the woman becoming impure because she has given birth to a child. I'm sure I've told you this before, but it's a very important idea. You'll find this in the Hasidic Sefer, the Shem Shmuel, who quotes his grandfather, the famous Kotzker Rebbe, a man of outstanding brilliance. And the Kotzker Rebbe, he says, asks or questions, why should it be that a woman in any way is impure, there is any tumah whatsoever with the birth of a child? As I said before, this is not death. Why on earth should it be in any way a reaction or a response to it which is similar to when she is a nido, which is a brush with death? There's no death here. In fact, it's a life, but not only a life, it's a soul. And says the Kotzker Rebbe, there is no greater holiness, there's no greater holy thing in this world than a human soul. A human soul can supersede the holiness even of an angel. So where is the room for negativity here? Why should there be any tumah at all? A life has been born, not a death. It is a soul, the holiest thing. And the Medrash reports, that in actual fact of every birth, the ultimate midwife who delivers and brings a life into the world is Hashem Yisborach himself. So where is the room for negativity? Well, the answer is, and I'm loving having this blackboard behind us, and as we're in effectively a classroom, maybe you remember back to your high school science, you probably remember that nature abhors something, nature hates something, and what nature abhors is a vacuum. So when I was in school, we used to demonstrate this by taking a jar, a glass jar, it's not very well drawn, but you get the idea, and then they would light a flame underneath it with a wick of some sort, and of course all the oxygen in there would be used up, and when the oxygen was used up, then the light would go out, the flame would go out. But of course, as soon as the oxygen is used up, unless you enclose the glass bulb, then of course new air will pour in, because nature abhors a vacuum. So in the same way that you've got a container here, then there's a container, a womb, that contains this soul. It's a place where a human soul, the holiest thing that ever is being instructed in its future life by an angel. That's pretty frum stuff. And when that child comes into the world, that space is vacated, and that space which is now previously occupied by holiness will now have negative forces which will rush in there, obviously we're talking in a mystical sense, to occupy the space that was previously taken up by holy forces. That's why there is tumah there. It's the removal of something which is holy. So let me point out to you, we said, of course, that if it is a girl, so if it's a girl who's born, then it's, if we remember, we said 7 days of when there is negativity, and then 33 days together before she completes the process and being able to, as it were, bring a sacrifice to the base of Mikdash. So therefore, at the highest possible levels of spiritual purity, she fails that because she's given birth to a child, and now negativity has filled that space, that womb, which previously was occupied by holiness, and therefore 40 days it's going to take to remove, to purge that those negative mystical forces which have occupied that space. That's if she gives birth to a girl. Or she gives birth to a boy. She gives birth to a boy, and we said this is double, 66 days and 14 days. In other words, altogether, instead of 40, it's now 80. It's double, 2 times, double the amount of time to remove the negativity that fills the womb after the removal of a female child, because there was twice as much kedusha in occupying the womb from a girl than a boy. This is something I discuss at great length in my new book, which is called Truly Great Jewish Woman Then and Now, which I hope you've managed to get hold of. But there's much more on that there. But that's what we're talking about. This is not, at first blush, it looks as though the Torah sees a woman as being, or a female child as being worse, certainly much worse, twice as bad, filled with negativity than a man. Oh, when a woman gives birth to a boy child, she's only Tommy for 40 days. For a girl child, 80. No, it's quite the opposite, precisely the opposite. It's because a woman, a girl, a baby girl, brought twice as much kedusha to that place, that twice as much tuma negativity occupies the space, and it'll take twice as much time to purge it and get rid of it. Quite the opposite to what you would see if you were to look at that at first glance. So that's I have to tell you, that's the basic idea. Now the Alshich is really perplexed, or wants us to be perplexed about the writing of this parsha. I don't know why I closed the Chumash, I'm going to need that. The Alshich, of course, lived in the 16th century in Tzras. If we travel much earlier back, we'll go to another great Sephardi great, and that is Shiur of the Chovos HaLevavos. This is my translation and commentary on Shiur, I called it Ufos Alev. And here in chapter 3, he says the following thing. He's talking about the factors that would lead a person to trust in Hashem. Well, first of all, in chapter 2, he talks about the factors that would lead you to trust anybody. That you know the person's a good person, he's a kind person, he won't forget about you, nobody can stop him doing what you want to do to help you, and he will be wise enough to know what would really and authentically help you, as opposed to that which will not actually help you. People sometimes are well-meaning in giving their advice, it's just the advice doesn't work, it's bad advice. Not a bad person, just inappropriate advice. Here he says, when he's talking about the second factor of the 7 factors that would lead you to trust somebody, he says, but when it comes to Hashem, you don't have to worry about any of the negatively factors when it comes to a human being who might not be able to follow through. God can always follow through. Let me read to you what he says here. I won't read the Hebrew because I've got my translation here, so there's no point in translating it twice. Human beings are one of the things that, of course, Hashem made. No creation knows more than its creator. He knows what will damage it or break it, how to fix it when it's broken. He knows what will cause it to become ill and what will cure it. He knows what will cause it to become ill and what will cure it. That's interesting. In other words, as we said before, if you go for advice or help from a human being, he might give you the wrong advice. He might not know what is the best thing for you. But that concern never applies to Hashem, because he made us from the very outset. He knows precisely exactly what we are, what our natures are, what's going to be good for us and what's going to be bad for us. So because I've got this school blackboard, or I should say a green board here behind me, and notice that I am addicted to this. I can't stop using this and giving examples, and of course if you're listening to this in the car, that's going to be difficult, but I'll describe what we're doing as we're going along. You know, we all know that the simple Aleph base 1 and 1 Judaism, there are 613 mitzvahs. Of the 613 mitzvahs, they split into do's and don'ts, positive and negative mitzvahs. There are 248 do's, and there are 365 don'ts. There's a don't for every day of the year. Therefore, that of course takes us back to our 613. The Talmud, and certainly the Kabbalistic books, split the human body up into the same fraction. There are 613 parts to the human body, according to traditional Jewish teaching. 248 bones and 365 sinews. And when, as it were, you do the mitzvah which requires you to use a certain part of your body, for example, a left arm and a right arm to put on tefillin for a man, fingers to strike a match and light candles, perhaps Friday night for a woman, a tongue to speak good things, not negative things like Lashon Hara, an ear. They say that the earlobes, if you've got earlobes which dangle, some people have got them fused to the side of their neck, side of their jaw. But if somebody's speaking Lashon Hara, a bit like earplugs, you've got your own earplugs you carry with you. You're supposed to stuff them into your ear and not listen to the Lashon Hara. In a sense, you get the idea that you're supposed to utilize the part of your body which, as it were, allows you to do that mitzvah through that part of your body. How many parts are there to the human soul? And again, it's exactly the same thing, the 613 parts to the human soul. Every time you do a mitzvah, you are perfecting that part of your soul. Just like you're perfecting your body, as it were, you're utilizing your body for good. The soul, which you were sent here to be mitaken, tikkun, this word that comes up so often, tikkun, they say correct, sounds a very clumsy word to my ear, but to perfect, to refine, to polish and to make sparkle that potential in that soul. There are 613 paths and 613 parts of the soul, 613 mitzvahs, which will do that job of perfecting you. No, but let me take you back to the Chavos Levavos, and we've still not got to the Alshich. The Chavos Levavos said that all illness ultimately comes from Hashem. Physical illness comes from Hashem. The Alshich is going to say that's precisely the message that is being imparted in our Parsha here, through the strange story about the woman who is impure by giving birth to a child. Why should there be any impurity? Why there's a connection to Nida, and what the whole business of this mysterious illness called Tzoras, which is not a physical illness, it has physical manifestations, but it's not an illness which is caused by physical sources or causes, but rather it is an illness which is caused by spiritual causes. Okay, so with that in mind, I think we can turn to the Alshich. So, as usual, this is my Alshich, 5 volumes. I should tell you that this is unavailable at the moment. I don't know why. I think probably because of COVID. I've been trying desperately to get another couple of copies because I give so many sharing in Alshich during the week. It would be very nice if my Talmidim who are sitting in front of me could get access to the same page that I'm on. The Alshich, I know he asks many questions here, and I don't think you'll thank me enormously if I just take you through 17 questions. I think we'll jump right into where he brings answers, and I'll fill in the gaps so that we've got the context of what's going on. So here he takes us into, and it's pretty Kabbalistic, I should warn you. Well, the Alshich, of course, was a great Makubal. I've told you before, he was a teacher of Moshe Cordovero, he was a Talmud of Moshe Cordovero, the famous author of Talmud Devorah, the Ramak, and he was the teacher of the Arizal. With that pedigree, you would rather expect that he would be a Kabbalist himself, indeed of the first order. He says, well, the rabbis tell us, when a person, now we've been talking about doing mitzvahs, 613 mitzvahs that are going to, each mitzvah is going to purify that fraction, that 613th of your soul. But what if the opposite, the converse occurs? What if you do something bad? What does that do? What do you create? Instead of perfecting and polishing the soul, what do you do to your soul? What do you do by creating an avera? So the rabbis say, ki kol over avera, if you do any avera, ki ilu bar ba koich hatuma, it's as though you created a negative force, shemakatra a negative force, in fact, an angel, you have created a force, a negative force. Angels we're all a bit stuck with Christian iconography and winged creatures, usually female for some reason, sort of all white and smiling. That's not what an angel is at all. And people say, oh, he's such an angel. You never want a human being to be an angel. Angels hate us. They really don't get us. The fact that we have freedom of choice, which they don't have, the fact that we consider and often do consciously contravene what God wants us to do is anathema to them. Even the greatest tzaddik, at least in defeating his Yetzer Hara, consider for a few seconds the possibility of listening and accepting the suggestion of the Yetzer Hara, that very possibility of accepting for a few seconds the possibility, to them is anathema, it's evil, and they really don't like us at all. When you do an avera, you create such a physical force. There's a well-known speaker called Charlie Harari, he's a very sweet fellow, and he came to one of my shiurim not too long ago, and when I was talking about angels, I translated it as an algorithm. Basically, it's a spiritual robot, and it's got an algorithm. It's got a job to do, and that's all it can do. It's created for that particular purpose. But when you do an avera, you create such a creature. You create such a spiritual force. It has a certain consciousness. It has a certain sentience. It is self-aware. And its job is to punish you and to draw the life force from you to sustain itself because you created it. And a little bit more in this Kabbalistic idea because I think it's interesting. The thing that you created, you've created a creature which is going to stand, as he's going to say in a second, at the gates of heaven or at the gates of hell, and you can't deny that you made it because it doesn't have a gender obviously, it looks like you. You're the clear creator of this negative force. It will stand there and be the prosecuting attorney in heaven. He made me, or she made me. Okay. And it grabs onto you. It wants to damage that soul that you have that created this negative thing. It's a bit like, I suppose, the person who is the junkie, the drug addict, pointing or wanted to have his revenge on the person who got him hooked on the drugs in the first place. That's what the angel does. Then that's part of the soul which has been contravened by you doing an avera, which only had been a mitzvah would have turned into a positive force, turns into a negative force. It draws its existence from that part of your soul, and it will punish you. Basically, you've created your own jailer, your own prosecutor, the person who might even ultimately be the person who damages you through illness or even death. So that's exactly what the Zohar says. Good. Hashem allows that negative force, the negative force that was generated by your doing avera, to as it were, come to life, to be an entity in its own right, and its job is to get its revenge. It doesn't want to be created, it doesn't want to be here. You did it, you're going to get the blame, and he's going to exact punishment and revenge on you as a consequence. That's a scary idea. Now, with that as an introduction number one, there's an introduction number two to understand what's going on in the Parsha. And that is the Hebrew word Odom. Now, he's going to analyze the Hebrew word Odom, and if you've watched my sharing before or been to any of my sharing in person, you will know I very often tell you that when it comes to Lashon HaKodesh, the language of the Torah, which I'm not translating as Hebrew and certainly not as Ivrit, because Ivrit is the modern Hebrew. I'm recording this in Yom HaTzmaut, so my Israeli watchers might get very annoyed at this. But Ivrit is a modern language, and as such is evolving and absorbs all sorts of non-Jewish or non-Hebraic influences. Televizia would be one. It would be one. Television. Civilization would be another. If you're ever walking in the streets of Jerusalem, you might notice manolim. Manolim? Manhole covers. Manolim, etc. This is an evolving language. But the language of the Torah is unique. We believe it was the language which God created first and through which he created the whole world. It is the DNA, if you like, of the whole world. And every word is crucial and counts. The rule, which I normally say is, one of the rules of Lashon HaKodesh, of the holy languages, there are no synonyms. Now there's, I don't know what it is, I see it advertised all the time, something called Grammarly. Apparently that repairs your sentences if they're not as good as they could be. I have a wife who does that for my sentences, for my writing, but certainly if you're looking for a synonym, if you're writing a piece, as I often do for my newspaper articles or for my books, and you don't want to use the same word in two sentences one after the other, you're looking for a word that means the same thing, but it gives you you move away from the tedium of repeating the same word. And of course, if you're using Word or in your computer, whatever word processing program you're using, you can always press a button and along it will suggest a whole bunch of synonyms. And in English there are so many synonyms, words that mean effectively the same thing. In Lashon HaKodesh there are no synonyms. So if, for example, I said to you the word man in Hebrew, the word man, what's the word for man? You might say ish, or you might say Adam, you might say Gibor, Enosh. There are lots and lots of words that mean man, but if Hebrew Lashon HaKodesh has no synonyms, then these different terms they're not repetitions, not different ways of saying the same thing. They are different things, different aspects of a man. So here, the Alshich, and I'll read this a little bit to you, he explains something which is very interesting. So let me read this. Because when it talks about the leprosy that we are going to, which is part of the whole story of the Parsha of Tazria, somebody sees leprosy, it says an Odom who sees. Now I could have said an Ish, or a Gibor, or an Enosh. Why does it say an Odom? What does Odom mean? So it says, the word Odom, it says, Odom ki yeba or bisra, it says, if he finds a man who finds his flesh, a little blotch. Kine, tower ze meshulul min ha'umas, azal. There is here another idea, which I think, again, I'm going to have to go off a tangent. We have an idea that there is a thing called a nefesh and a neshama. A nefesh and a neshama. Now, going back to my blackboard, in case you're you're wondering where there's a pause and you have that funny noise. So nefesh, oh, love that old-fashioned sound. Nefesh and neshama. Neshama. Nefesh means soul. How would you translate neshama? Neshama you would probably translate also as soul. But remember, there are no synonyms in Lashon HaKodesh. They can't both be soul. We don't have repetition. So what is a soul? So basically every human being has a soul. And neshama, if I'm looking for a translation, and it's going to sound a little bit as I'm trying too hard, but I would normally translate it as a super soul. Super in the classic sense, a super extra. A super soul. And only Jews are given a super soul. Only Jews have a neshama. Everybody has a soul, but a super soul is unique to Jews. Why? The answer is, using my board, this is very, very good. If you're listening to this, then you have to make a word picture or paint a picture in your mind. Sometimes you see big trucks on the highway, and they're driving along, and they're driving one, and they carry a big trailer behind them, and they've got a wheel there, sometimes 2 wheels at the front, and then sometimes 3 wheels at the back. And if you look very closely, you might often see, with these things joining the actual that bit to this bit, and you often see one of the wheels is off the ground. So you maybe 2 wheels at the front of the trailer and 3 wheels at the back, but usually this one, the one from the third from the end, is off the ground. Why is it off the ground? Well, when it's fully laden, then it carries obviously more weight, and you put down, they can wind down this axle which comes and makes contact with the ground. But there's no reason to burn rubber for when there's no weight there, so they take this up after they've delivered their load. Obviously, the more weight, you need an extra axle to cover it. That is my understanding of a neshama. As Jews have more mitzvahs to do than non-Jewish people, how many, by the way? Well, the Ramban says, Ramban Nachmanides, that there are, as we know, 7 Noachite commandments, 7 key core commandments for non-Jewish people, and there are 10 commandments for Jewish people. These, incidentally, often, the 7 and the 10 often are repeats or copies of each other. And then, in the 10 commandments, that therefore, if we get 613, we're back to our 613, then says the Ramban that really the 10 commandments are super commandments, and these 10 commandments really contain all the other 613. So therefore, you have a ratio, take out the 10, you get 603. So basically, very roughly, but the 10 commandments divided by 603 is obviously 60. Each of the 10 commandments, 60.3 is it? 60. A ratio of 1 to 60. Somebody called the Ritvo says it's the same with the 7 Noachite commandments. You've got a ratio of 1 to 60, so therefore 60 times 70 times 60 would give us 420. So the Noachite commandments turn into 420 commandments. That's pretty obvious, as one of the Noachite commandments is to make laws and set up law courts. That means when a country or a state decides that it's 70 miles an hour on the freeway is the speed limit, that is the force of Torah law. They've made up laws, and that's exactly what they're supposed to do. Society is supposed to make up laws. But the 7 Noachite commandments turns into 420, just like the 10 commandments turns into 613. So in actual fact, the number of commandments between 613 and 420 is not actually such a big gap after all, but it's a gap. In other words, Jews have still got to carry a little bit more, or a significant amount more than the 420 commandments down here. So therefore, they're going to need, as it were, an extra axle to carry that, and that extra axle is going to be a neshama, a super soul, another axle to carry an extra degree of weight. I hope that made sense. So Odom defines and refers to a human being who's carrying that extra load. It's a human being who is not only carrying it, but doing it well. It's a Jew at the highest spiritual level. Enish, Gibor, these are all these names that can be used for Jews as well as non-Jewish people. They're interchangeable. But Odom is as a term which is a unique term for a human being who carries well the highest spiritual task. So he says, and all the names that a Jewish person can be called, that's the most praiseworthy of all. And that name, Odom, only applies to the very greatest Jews, somebody like the Chofetz Chaim, the Vilna Gaon, the Rambam, people like that. Okay, not Gibor, not Enish, and Ish. All of those refers to different aspects of the spiritual makeup of a man, by the way, but we don't have time to go into this. Okay, having said all that, I'm reading a little bit further to you, for you. Hui Masroya al Kain Goyma Yikran and the Tuma Ain Kartuma Oban Alsabahem. The illness that we're talking about, that affects a person by speaking Lashon Hara, which will produce physical blotches on his or her skin, is something which applies only to somebody who's called Odom, when a person is at the highest spiritual level. At the highest spiritual level, speaking of Lashon Hara will have an effect, a negative effect, which will produce and come out in a physical form. Now there's a wonderful sefer called Peliotes, and the Peliotes says, when he's talking about the laws of Jews not hating other Jews, don't hate your brother in your heart. He discusses why does the Torah add the word in your heart, and he says, because if you have upset somebody, and they come and they say, look, this is what you've done, and you've upset me. Now, it might be that the person's too sensitive, and he shouldn't have been upset by this, but if somebody comes to express an upset to you, and it's legitimate, then you can say, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to do it, or maybe I did, but I just wasn't sensitive enough to know that would be hurtful to you, and you can put it right. But if the person keeps their hatred in their heart, don't hate your brother in your heart, there's no way of knowing that you've got something to remedy, because he's keeping his hatred, as the Italian mafia likes to say, revenge is a dish best served cold. You wait, and then you get your revenge. Nobody sees it. Similarly, same idea. If you get an indication by the person telling you that you've upset me, you can put it right. At the highest spiritual level, if you've done something wrong, you've spoken Lashon Hara, and you're in the highest spiritual level, and out comes a blotch in your skin which shows that, then you can put that right. But if you're not in the highest spiritual, I think there's a famous children's nurse, sort of like fairy story, I think it's called the fairy story, called The Princess and the Pea. I'm sure you're all familiar with this. The princess comes and there's a pea on the mattress, and she can feel something. They bring another mattress, and another. Sometimes the kids' books it's like Prince at the top of 100 mattresses, but she's so sensitive, having spent her whole life, in luxury and the most beautiful feather mattresses. She could feel that pea way down, that little green pea, all the way down, 60 mattresses below. Obviously, it's just a story, but there is a certain truth, a certain resonance there. At the highest spiritual level, then something which for you and I, who are definitely not Odom, well, maybe you are, I'm certainly not, who could be defined as Odom, then that sensitivity is going to be disturbed by the fact that you spoke Lashon Hara, and it will have an effect, and that's a good thing. Because then you can do something about it. So again, it's not a physical illness, the Tzoras thing, and we'll see how this relates in a second to the birth of a child, etc. It's not a physical illness, it's a spiritual illness, which has a physical sign. Is that symptom necessary? Only in as much as it's there to indicate to the person what he has or she has done wrong, to allow them to put it right, and to invite the person to do tshuva. Okay. What's supposed to happen? So that it goes on and says that the person is locked up for 7 days. And why is there 7 days? So the Alshich says the 7 days is there for reflection. Because we're talking about, because it's a spiritual disease, what did I do wrong that could have provoked this indication to me I've done something wrong? And how do I put it right? Being alone, hisbaidus in Hebrew is a very important word. Self-reflection, meditation is the wrong word. It's sort of like it's got too many Far Eastern as sitting cross-legged and going that's not what it's about. It's more like therapy, self-therapy. Where am I? Where am I holding? What could I have done wrong that made me possibly do this? I met the Rebbe in charge of the seminary I teach today. She's got a sty in her eye. I'm just getting over one in my eye. And I said, oh, that's terrible. She said, yeah. And she said to me, and I've been thinking, was I looking at something I shouldn't have looked at? Maybe with jealousy to somebody, but that's the normal Jewish reaction. This physical manifestation, it's there to tell me something. I said, did I look at something I shouldn't have looked at? Was I jealous of somebody? That's exactly what's going on here. Because somebody in the highest spiritual level has spoken Lashon Hara, they got Tzoras like Miriam did. It's a kindness of God to indicate to you you've done something wrong, so you're able to cure it and put it right. As the Alshich puts, Akein Laman Yitin Al Libo Latakin Es Asher Avasa. So the person can change what they did wrong. And he goes on to say the 7 days parallel the 70 years of a person's life. And Chazal say, that the world was Kedai because of a great tzaddik, for the world to be created. And this is an autumn we're talking about. It's not going to happen to me. Even if I speak Lashon, I'm not going to get blotches in my skin. I'm not on that level. But somebody is a very holy person, a Chofetz Chaim, somebody like that. Actually, not even a Chofetz Chaim. We're talking in previous generations of people on much higher levels of the Chofetz Chaim. Then that insensitivity that led you to speak in a disparaging way about somebody would have an indication from God. That's a kindness. Fine. So far, so good. Now, what's that got to do with the beginning of the story? The story about a woman who is a Nida. It's not a Nida, she gave birth. Why are you comparing this to Nida? I get the idea a woman is a Nida, that there's a period of 7 days, and then, this whole business of the mikveh, 12 days altogether, maybe 5 days when she's told me because of the actual monthly cycle occurring, and then 7 days of purification afterwards. Yes, we did say at the beginning of the Shiur there's a connection to death. I get that. Why is it connected to death here? And here the Alshich says something very interesting. So let me read this to you. You see, you mustn't think. Well, this is what he's trying to say, and it's exactly what the Shar B'Tochen said before. We believe that ultimately all illness is a spiritual cause. In fact, I saw in a Hasidic Sefer many years ago, or I heard, I can't remember if I saw or I heard, that ultimately, even though Tzoras does not occur in the same way as it did at the time of the Chumash, and later on at the early days of the Jewish people in the land of Israel, but that phenomenon still occurs. It's just it doesn't come to the surface. It causes internal illness by people speaking badly. Anybody who's suffered illness and the psychology of illness will know the psychological pathology. I don't know if there is chairs in psychological pathology, but there should be. Stress is a great contributor to cancer, for example. But when a person lives a certain kind of life, it can, the psychological, philosophical, behavioral components of a person's life can lead indeed to physical components. I knew somebody was a therapist who told me many years ago that people who come to see him with tremendous neurosis later in life, it's because they committed adultery, which was never discovered. Their wife or their husband did not discover that they committed adultery with somebody else. They carried on the so-called affair. The adultery stopped, and then they carried on. But the guilt went on with them. Guilt can be a tremendously toxic thing. But let me read a little bit more of what the Alshich has to say here. The point he's trying to make is or the Torah is trying to make is, don't make the mistake of thinking that illness comes about as a consequence of just physical things. Not at all. Ultimately, it's spiritual things. So the Alshich, now again, he's writing in the 16th century. This is long before microscopes are able to spot bacteria, etc. But at the time, he says the following thing. And it doesn't matter the accuracy of this, because it's what people believe. We'll see this as being crucial. They believed still to have physical components. One, Nibilas Nivas. People thought that Tzoras was caused by people having sexual relations with women who were Nida, who were at the time of who were menstruants, I think is the English word, at the time of menstruation. Or Beis Machmas Orla, or because people were uncircumcised. They believed uncircumcised people can cause a person to get disease. Oh, incidentally, even today, you will know that people are uncircumcised, that there is something called smegma that gathers underneath the foreskin, which in actual fact is carcinogen, can cause cancer. So that's not such a crazy idea. So they believed these two things were the cause of Tzoras. So let me read to him. Therefore, as a consequence, in fact, he quotes here from the Medrash Rabbah, there's two, I'll read this to you because it's actually very, pertinent, as you'll see in a second. Mishnei b'nei melech, there was two princes. Echad shebikshel lemoel kedas Moshe Yisrael. One wanted to be circumcised, become a Jew. And in order that their father should not stop them being circumcised, that the mother was sent, dispatched, to ask permission of the king on behalf of their sons to be circumcised. And the reason they wanted to be circumcised, not because they wanted the father to know they wanted to become a Jew, which might have resulted in their execution. The logical, the rational, the reason they supplied to the father, to the king, which he would understand is, because I don't want to get Tzoras, I don't want to get leprosy. So he says, and I'll read to the end of this, but it's not because it's got a physical component, no matter what people believe is the reason for the physical component of Tzoras. Because in the case here, in the case at the beginning of the Parsha, when it talks about a woman who gives birth to a child, that's not talking about nidas, and yet still she is Tommy. There's still tuma there. Don't think that the negativity, physical negativity, spiritual negativity, is caused by any physical component. It's not ultimately caused by spiritual. Kihina bilas nida in it, because there's no bilas nida. It couldn't be that because it's talking there about a woman who gives birth, and then there's and she's separated from her husband for that period of time, doesn't go near the base of Mikdash. She keeps Taras Mishpacha. And yet, Jews who keep Taras Mishpacha can get Tzoras. So couldn't it be because of that physical reason that people believe? Because Jews don't have sexual relations during time of Nidas. Because everybody knows that that's when Jewish husbands and wives separate. No, even when a woman has had a child, when there is no question of nidas, it was not that, she can still be impure even though there is no nida, and there is no question of menstrual blood, etc. As Rashi says, in fact the halacha says, if a woman's womb were to open without blood having been expelled, if somehow we could know that, she would be a nida even though there's no blood. It's nothing to do with blood. So that's not the reason why a person could be spiritually affected. It's not a question of a physical component producing that disease, it's a spiritual component. In the case of the woman, as Rashi goes on to say, the reason why, different to understood before, the component is that she wanted, the reason why the woman is Tommy, ducked twice for a boy than for a girl, is because, and I can understand this, when a woman gives birth, obviously it's almost always an extremely painful process. I used to annoy my late wife with that shalom by saying, I don't know why I attended every birth, didn't feel like nothing at all. She frowned at me. My mother used to say, if women had the first and men had the second, there would never be a fourth. That was quite profound. Yes, I don't think I would go through that if I was a woman many times. In fact, the second time. Hence, if a woman had the first, men had the second, then never be a fourth. Men wouldn't go through this another time. However, Rashi says when a woman goes through that, she says, that's it. I'm never going through this again. She makes an oath never to go near her husband or let her husband come near her. They're not going to conceive another child. And that's the negative thing, she said. That produced the tumor. And therefore, again, it's nothing to do with a physical component, blood, contaminating. No. It's because she did something wrong. If that was the case, that when she has a child, which there's no negativity flowing from this, even if she was to deliver a child, there's no Tzoras that comes from Nida, because there's no Nida in Gaul Israel. Generally, people who keep those halachas. Al pi darko remza to Rasin Hakadosh, that's why the Torah says, "Egam tumas isha haya mashkocha b'tachava el oven." That even the tumah of a woman who gives birth is ultimately caused by the fact that she did something wrong. She forswore never to allow her husband to come near her again. Which of course automatically gives her the opportunity how to put that right. And that's why there's a double amount of saying sorry for when she is, double amount of process of escaping this imposition of her being limited in contacting or coming near the Beis Hamikdash for a boy, because when it was a boy, she wasn't so. She had the compensation of a boy who's going to, as it were, particularly in the time of the Gemara, in fact, for most of human history, when wealth and security is going to produce more by a boy than a girl, because men are physically stronger. Most men worked in fields, most did physical exercise and physical work, which will do better than women. Therefore, it's more of a blessing in a physically, after a physically strong person than somebody who's physically weaker in a society that's going to be, where wealth is going to be generated by physical effort. Therefore, so she did not get so upset. She didn't maybe make those promises to keep away from her husband quite so much when it was a boy child. She was a little bit compensated. But when a girl, all went through this, and I'm not even going to have a strong son to look after me in my old life, in my old age. He comes there, Hagdama, a Rufus, and the guy, who you say, that's bus to Pishtam, that's what it's twice. The Huki had called Talaba Oven. The whole idea is to tell you that it's because of the sin that the woman did, and for swearing for being near her husband, that caused this to happen to her. It wasn't a question of midas, etc. It's a spiritual, it's a sin that causes ultimately a physical illness, the same as Tzoras causes a physical illness. But when you speak Lashon Hara, Tzoras is the physical illness from having spoken Lashon Hara. Fuki had called Talib Oven, says the Alshich, it all depends on getting it wrong. In other words, the more spiritual a life you lead, the more you're working and polishing the 630 components of your soul, the better your life will physically be. Huki akol tolaba oven ki bezocher, the simchas boyim nescharat yosef bekorav meshavuas labilti tzavla olai. And he repeats the idea we said before, because having a boy child will give her less cause to regret and deny the possibility of repeating the process of another conception in the future. And therefore, that's why there's twice as much, 80 days all in all, for the woman to, as it were, regretting having become pregnant in the first place, and be willing to become pregnant again. Because there was twice as much regret she expressed having given birth to a daughter. It's a sin, it's a negative spiritual decision which causes ultimately illness, and that leads on, and that's what it says here, that you, having a double amount of being alone and preparing yourself and regretting what you've done wrong, will uproot the more severe reaction you had to having a girl than to having a boy. That will establish the principle it's nothing to do with midas. It's not that caused Surrash. It's because of just like the woman is punished for a sin, the Adam, the man, is punished for the sin too, at the highest spiritual levels, and that is he will get Surrash. He'll get a semen that something has gone wrong, which he has to repair. She has to repair that too, twice as much, for twice as much regret in having a baby girl and promising never to have another child than if she had a boy. That's the discrepancy, according to the Alshich. But what comes out from this is very important, which is ultimately we believe that all illness ultimately has, well, like everything is sourced in God. This is hardly too controversial. Everything comes from God. And when suffering comes to a person, very often illness can be the greatest catalyst for a person to change in a positive direction. Another one of my books is called The Little Book for Big Worries, but that's discussed in a much greater detail. So I hope you've enjoyed a little insight into why it starts off by talking about Nida when we're going on to Tzoras. It does establish the principle that all Averas, whether it is all Tuma, ultimately comes from Avera, not from physical components. Therefore, we only have to look like that Rebson did when she's found this sty in her eye. I don't remember looking at something badly. There could be a connection. In fact, there is a connection. I'll see you all, and hopefully share this, or Alshich, next week. Good Shabbos.